This is Specific Objects, Talks on Art in the Catskills, and I'm your host, Miriam Atkin. This week's show will diverge from the typical interview format in that we have three people in the studio encountering a particular work of art for the first time. My guests will each share a short piece, and then the three of us will have an open discussion about what we've heard. I've always loved the spontaneous conversation that can happen when encountering an artwork for the first time, and radio seems like a great medium through which to experiment with that format. So to begin, I'll introduce my guests. Evan Lindorff-Ellery is a sound and visual artist based in the Hudson Valley, and he is the owner and curator of Notice Recordings. His most recent albums are Symbols and Night on Aloe Records from Beijing and Church Recordings from Monhegan on Full Spectrum Records. Jeff Benjamin is an archaeologically inclined writer and artist living and working in the gently eroded Silurian and Devonian plateau known as the Catskills. He is a member of several art archaeology collectives, including the Hub for Speculative Fabulation Upon Incidental Observations, Copenhagen, Denmark, Nana Domain, Serifos, Greece, and the International Society of Antiquaries, Beacon, New York, and Pebble in My Shoe Research Collective, Helsinki, Finland. He has a PhD in archaeology from Columbia University and a master's in industrial archaeology from Michigan Technological University. To begin, I'm going to play an audio track. This is Evan Lindorff-Ellery. So what were we just hearing?
That was a excerpt, 5-minute or 4-minute excerpt from a piece called At Night in Poughkeepsie, released by Aloe Records, an album called Symbols and Night. Released, Aloe Records is based in Beijing, China. And it is a document of me in Poughkeepsie at night. That particular situation, I don't normally end up in Poughkeepsie because I don't live on that side of the river. But I had got back from the city on the train, and I was feeling like I wasn't ready to get in my truck and drive back to Kingston. So I just decided to walk around for a bit. It was like a kind of a weirdly balmy October night, and there were some lingering crickets. And I found an interesting spot next to a warehouse, which was kind of like my Chicago days of wandering industrial areas and like recording and photographing and writing. So I was kind of feeling inspired by this specific spot, and it had kind of a creek, an urban creek that was flanked by two sides of concrete. And I was interested by how that sounded against the walls of the warehouse. And I sat there and listened to that for a while and found some objects that were sitting on the concrete by me, and just kind of started moving them around the concrete surface, and then started humming as I moved the objects, and did that for about 20 minutes and recorded it, and then sent it to the record label. And that's it.
And go ahead, Jeff.
It was beautiful.
Thanks.
I placed myself, for some reason, I closed my eyes and I placed myself in an underpass.
Yeah.
Like under a highway underpass. Maybe that's...
It's interesting that moving water, because I'm really interested in moving water, and I have another album called Hudson Valley Water Recordings, or something like that, on a German record, on a German label that is about my interactions with creeks and rivers in the Hudson Valley. But it's interesting that you said that, because rivers and creeks can be misinterpreted as highways,
right.
And moving vehicles going through an acoustical filter like an underpass.
Right.
Yeah.
I heard like a domestic indoor scene.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah, it felt like some kind of private moment overheard, but in a weird way, because what you were doing was so almost like more repetitive than what you'd do if you were cooking dinner or washing the dishes. But that's the vibe I got, is like this sort of private routine.
Yeah. I think in the press release that I wrote for this, I mentioned unintentional ceremony, and so a lot of times when I do performances, especially on my own with the objects that I use, they kind of like have a relationship with the objects, and they kind of end up being ceremonial in a way, or like even like almost fetishizing the objects in a personal way, which then extends into more of a open-ended, perhaps universal relationship with how the objects exist in the world, or something like that.
Yeah, unintentional ceremony, I think, describes well what I felt I was hearing.
Yeah.
Did the scratching leave marks? Were you making a drawing?
It's a good question. I don't think so. It was it was like pavement. And from my experience, doing that on pavement wouldn't leave too many marks. I have done that on like large flat rocks by a river, and it definitely would leave mark. And I've done like drawings and stuff. But yeah, in a different circumstance, it probably would.
Is it, it sounds like you didn't alter it much.
I never alter anything,
Okay.
really. Yeah.
Is this representative of a kind of practice in which you are collecting things throughout the day regularly, and then certain things end up in your album preserved, and then other things just like end up in the archive? Is that
collecting things like collecting sound recordings?
Yeah.
I mean, I collect objects too, but I wouldn't say it's on a daily basis. But I'll in nature I'll find a spot where I can either use objects that I bring with myself, like sometimes I bring like pieces of metal or some kind of resonant object or a bell, or I will find things in nature by a river or some interesting wood, and I'll just do a session, or I will do it at home if I have access to a space that is fairly quiet. But yes, I take recordings or field recordings because I consider it a field recording of a session, but I wouldn't call it field recording. And then I just kind of go through them and pick out what to send to a label. And I don't edit them. Like maybe I'll edit out something like really unruly that I don't think works at all, but 95% of it is just as it happened.
Were you transported to Chicago when you did it?
No, I had a relationship with that space in Poughkeepsie. I mean, I felt like I was engaged with it as being that moment in Poughkeepsie. But I was inspired to take that walk because of Chicago and Portland, Oregon, times as well in that city too.
Because I was trying to pick up the hum, and there's somewhat,
I was humming, yeah.
Yeah, you're humming, but then
Yeah.
there's also the hum of the city. And as you know, in Chicago has a pitch.
For sure.
Like different cities have different pitches. I forgot what
Right.
Chicago's like D flat or something.
Oh, is that right?
Yeah. And like someone's
Is
done.
that consistent?
Yeah, I think so. I think it is. Yeah, someone's like localized the pitches for different cities,
Oh.
and Chicago has this really unique like roar, like it just roars.
I think it's mostly the freeways
Probably.
and the material that is most present.
Yeah, the highway that goes along the lake there. And stuff.
Lakeshore Drive.
Yeah, but Poughkeepsie must have its own. And so I didn't really know it was Poughkeepsie when I was listening to it, but there was this undercurrent going on that I was trying to pick up,
Yeah.
It's cool.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, I think an urban creek bordered by concrete, I mean, that sounds like Poughkeepsie. Poughkeepsie is pretty much that. It's such a kind of ugly, beautiful place.
Yeah.
And, the mighty river is I'm sure asserting some kind of sonic effect in the space.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, especially water carries sounds on the surface of it quite easily. So we're probably getting sounds from the other side of the river as well that float over.
I felt when I was listening to it, like it was kind of like what I was doing last night. It kind of like just it felt like self-soothing, The hum is kind of like this self-soothing thing and the word that kept coming to my head was concoction. I felt like something, or maybe we already said that. Did we say that?
No.
I haven't heard that word today.
But something was being brewed up, kind of like.
Yeah, it's interesting that you mentioned the hum because the person who runs Aloe Records, his name is Sun, and in emails he was like, I love the humming. I really love the humming, and I think it's probably uncommon in whatever kind of music this is,
right.
Sound art or really weird outsider free improv or whatever it is. Yeah, so maybe I should use my voice more.
It's nice.
I'm curious, the field recordings that you're collecting during the daytime as you move throughout the world, how does that correspond to the way that you treat live performance? Because I imagine that's feels like a completely different thing. You're like a piece like this is a private moment that you kind of happened upon spontaneously, And then performance is, it's public. You're being looked at.
Yeah.
And it's something that you intend to do.
Right. I intend to do it. Yeah. Well, I struggle with this a lot. Or I don't struggle, I guess, as much anymore. I think about it a lot now because I'm not a trained musician based on what you just heard. But I mean, like, I also do experiment with actual instruments, and I guess I don't have a lot that I could default on, like if I'm improvising in front of an audience, there's not a lot of things that I could reliably do that if I'm stuck, like I have no idea how to play a chord or how to do an interesting rhythm or, all these things. So I guess without that experience, I've been trying to figure out ways of like, how do I make something that is compelling or that I think is compelling and successful to an audience or or whoever, because I'll do, especially when I'm working with feedback or things that are amplified, and the feedback, I do that a lot lately, like, is so unreliable. I mean, it can be reliable if you learn how to control it well, but there are definitely moments where like, oh man, this is amazing. Or I have like all this crap in the guitar. It's like a really interesting preparation. And I have these like really cool chords or tones, and I couldn't like recreate that on demand in a live setting. It takes a while to build up to that point that is compelling. So I guess when I know that I'm going to perform somewhere, I go in my mind like, okay, what can I do that like I know I can most likely do reliably in front of people? And because I guess I'm not confident enough to just like totally wing it and like not care at all. But I think that some people are probably at like that, where they're okay they're comfortable with failing. I guess I'm not as comfortable with failing yet.
Yeah. Or there's some kind of performance shtick that a person can fall back on.
Yeah, right. Yeah, the performance shtick. I noticed Elmar Golis. I think he's really comfortable with failing. Not that I think he is unsuccessful at all, or that I see him do things that are failures, but I see that in the most loving way, because like when I see him perform, he goes through all these objects, and like the moment he does something that I can sense that like he's like, oh, that's not working, he just like throws it to the side and goes to something else and picks up other objects, and it's like such a kind of haphazard but like really loving way of approaching things.
I think you should just break into song and start humming and singing.
Yeah, right.
Seriously. It sounded so nice. You have a good humming voice.
Thank you. Yeah.
Can I hum along? You were kind of humming scales.
Oh, really?
It seemed that way. They were scalar.
I was doing scales.
Yeah.
I'm actually experiencing some technical difficulty, so I really appreciated that little interlude.
Well, you were, but it looks good. I think you got it.
I'm too comfortable with failure. I love failure.
Yeah. No, I know. Yeah, totally. I don't want people to think that I'm afraid of failure.
It's like a soft, fluffy bed of leaves.
Right.
It's just leaves, like crunchy leaves.
Totally.
Yeah.
Leaves are reliable, actually.
They are.
To contact to mic.
Right.
If you really sensitive, like get really amplified leaves with a really sensitive mic, it's going to sound really awesome.
Yeah.
People are going to be like, whoa, it doesn't get old.
It never gets old. Yeah.
I have a question about spaces. So is there a particular type of space that you're most drawn to performance-wise?
I think it would depend on whether I'm using feedback or not. And that's been like a thing lately, because I've had access to a studio where I can pretty consistently record, and it has a lot of resonance to it. And the feedback acts in pretty wild ways. So if I were to do it in a room that's like pretty dull, I probably wouldn't be using feedback too much. So yeah, The room the performance changes depending on the room, for sure.
I would also like to hear you say something about Notice recordings, because I think that Notice has such plays an important role in the experimental music scene in and around the Hudson Valley.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, so you're regularly curating performances.
Mm-hmm.
So maybe say a little bit about the history of your curation practice in the Hudson Valley.
The history of the practice. Well, I'll quickly say that Notice recordings started in 2009, and I started, and I've released pretty consistently maybe 4 to 10 albums a year since then, 4 to 8. And we're at 90 plus albums. 90. I'm announcing the 90th album on February 28th. So 90.
Cool.
But I think I accidentally skipped a few catalog numbers. But I ignore that. Like, I don't think NTR 15 exists, and I don't think NTR 72 exists. I started kind of curating events around 2020. But since then, it's been like, well, I just put together a document of all the shows I've ever organized so I can show people or like organizations that I'm applying to. And it's about 65 shows. So, yeah.
Can I ask you a question about, are they solely on cassette releases? Is that?
The shows?
I'm sorry, the recordings.
The recordings
like Notice.
of Notice, yeah. They are. I mean, now they're all available as download.
Oh, they are. Okay.
Yeah. So,
right. Yeah.
I mean, we started releasing on cassette, and there was no download available. There was, I don't think, Bandcamp definitely did not exist when we started, and it was all cassette. Mm-hmm. And then when Bandcamp started, we kind of dragged our heels on that for a couple of years, and then finally signed up.
Well, I have to say that one of the main reasons I buy them is for their objectness.
Yeah, the objectness.
The way they look.
They look good. They're printed by this great printer, and now he's in Alabama, but I met him in New Orleans. But yeah, he does a really good job.
But a lot of these are your drawings on the cover, right?
Yeah, 90% of them are my drawings.
Yeah,
they're all my designs. They're almost all my drawings. Sometimes the musician will want me to use something, and they'll submit their own, and then I kind of work it into the design. But most of them are my drawings. Yeah.
Really nice drawings.
Thanks.
Really cool.
You're listening to WGXC 90.7, and this is Specific Objects, Talks on Art in the Catskills. I'm your host, Miriam Atkin, and today I'm talking with Evan Lindorff-Ellery and Jeff Benjamin. And Jeff is going to read from a piece called
Abstract Concrete. This abstract is a premonition. This abstract is a dispirited drive across the country. This abstract is Oregon. This abstract is Nebraska. This abstract is a vast emptiness, where thoughts hover in the sky for years. One can take a thought, place it in this abstract, leave it for a month, a year, a near lifetime, and then return to see the same thought just where one left it, safe and sound. This is the reason this abstract was created, as a safe haven. This abstract is all abstracts. This abstract creates a home in each sentence, out of necessity, without difficulty. This abstract could do better, but it does all it can. It could be a poem, or it could be an elegant physics equation, or even a well-researched historical essay, but it is not. It is a lake. This abstract whispers reassuring words before sleep comes. It breathes quietly and warms the bed. This abstract is an emotional thaw. This abstract is a flood of memories recollected alone. This abstract is a sprawling city. This abstract is a peace complex. This abstract is an experiment. As far as control is concerned, this abstract seeks only to control itself. This abstract carries within itself a deep abiding happiness. This abstract is a stack of mail waiting in a post office box in Helsinki. This abstract is beyond everything. It is ethereal. It exists here at this time and place only to state its own nature, to say once again that this abstract is simply itself. It is static, and it does not elude holding. It has no fear. It is comforting in the hands, good for carrying, contemplating, while sitting on a bench, placing on a table. There are those who will say that this cannot work. that in such times everything refers to something else, even an abstract which proclaims not to. Let me clarify. This abstract takes no preemptive action. It does not reach out beyond itself. This abstract is blind. It stares inward. It is receptive. It waits to be held and read. This abstract is a willing receptacle for memories that no one else can hear. It is an audience for internal truths that no one else can handle. This abstract is ultimate utility. This abstract is not bitter. This abstract is mother. This abstract is an invitation for sensitivity because it simply listens. It does not speak. Those who are looking for anything other than what is written in this abstract have found the wrong abstract. This abstract has dispensed with cynicism. In keeping with this, it should be noted that this abstract is not dismissive. This abstract acutely feels a collective social pain. This abstract does not misrepresent itself, just as this abstract is a suggestion to see and accept this abstract for what it is. It also makes serious demands upon itself. It therefore does not leave one alone in effort. This abstract matches one's efforts, word for word, thought for thought. Next one is called Session Concrète. Call for papers, this room, right here, right now. In this session, we seek to understand this room right here, right now. Nothing more, nothing less. Most of all, this is a meditation on and rebellion against speech and language, and how, as John Zerzan has noted, language pulls us away from place, leads us away from presence, takes us away from the here and now. This session is an experiment to see if we can stay embedded in the present moment through language by simply addressing the room that we are in. Of course, we cannot exclude externals. Obviously, during this session, we will discuss other things. But we will try to stay focused on the room itself, its materials, its quality of light, the surface treatment of the walls. Are they painted? Are they paneled? Who painted them? Who paneled them? Towards this purpose, we seek papers that specifically address this room, even before anyone has had the opportunity to see it with their own eyes. To be fair, the session organizers have chosen a room that they themselves have never seen. This is coincidentally one conference room at the Center for the Study of the Relationship Between Words and Stones. Potential participants are invited to research this room remotely and thoroughly, learn as much about its construction, and all of the various historical forces and events that came together to create this room. Participants are also invited to do no such thing, to come to speak about the room as an abstraction and move into the particulars of its being as experienced on the day of the session, to approach this as an exercise in a priori knowledge. We welcome abstracts on either side of this field of inquiry as well as everything in between. We only ask that they clearly demonstrate an interest and curiosity in one day coming together seriously, quite physically, to form a gathering where we individually and collectively explore, examine, meditate upon, and dream about this room right here, right now.
I feel like it just so happens that reading, it could almost function in some way as a commentary on Evan's piece.
Mm-hmm.
I was kind of thinking that too.
Yeah, there's a lot of commonality there, actually. Because, this is from a book that I just put out. This is with Marco Marilla and Trinu Silla. We put this book together, and it has drawings in it. And the drawings, actually, I did with my eyes closed.
That's great.
So
I was just talking to my housemate about drawing with one's eyes closed this morning.
Yeah. So you can draw by listening, kind of. You're listening to you're feeling too. And I closed my eyes. I was listening to your piece, and I was seeing a drawing. I was seeing forms being formed.
And you form a relationship with where your hand is on the paper.
Yep.
Yeah.
Where your hand is on the paper, and you're kind of feeling for the extent of the paper.
And memory of where you've been, where
Exactly.
you've already been on the paper. It's like traveling.
Yep.
Yeah.
So you think maybe you're drawing something, or as you draw, you think, oh, maybe this is what I'm drawing.
And then you open your eyes and you're like, oh
Whoa.
my God. And you know what? Every time I do that, it's always fascinating.
Always better for me.
It's always better. Yeah, right. It's always better.
They're gorgeous drawings.
Oh, thank you. Thank you very much.
Yeah. Can you say more about the origin of this book and the context. What you wrote. What was the project that you wrote it for?
Well, Marco and I decided that we liked abstracts. We liked writing abstracts for conferences.
And who is Marco?
Oh, sorry, Marco Marela. Marco Marela is an archaeologist and an artist who lives in Helsinki, Finland. And he's the person that I did this book with. And we each contributed abstracts, and we just kind of put them together. So the ones that I just read were some of the ones that I wrote. And there's some other here by Marco. And about half and half, I guess. And we just kind of mixed them together. Yeah. So.
And it was presented at a conference.
Some of these this room right here actually made it into a conference. This room right here right now made it into a conference. Yeah. And so that was kind of an ambitious one, because that would have meant that I would have had to research the room, the building, and I did. I started to research the building where this was going to be, and this was in Oslo. And so I was contacting the architect, and then I started to feel like, well, I was getting a bit intrusive, and that, it was a little bit weird that I was kind of doing so much research about the construction materials and the techniques and the history of this building that I backed off from it a little bit.
How did you present it to them when you were inquiring?
I told them everything. I gave them the abstract. I told them what I was going to be doing. That I was going to be trying to have a session where we did nothing other than just have the session. That the session itself was about the session, and that there wasn't going to be any subject matter. The session was this session, and I failed. But I love failure.
What was their response?
It was a very positive. There was a positive response. Yeah, I mean, I veered away from my ambition, I have to say, in the final presentation. But that's kind of the point of this book, is that we Marco and I talked about how much we loved writing abstracts. But then when it comes time to writing the paper, it becomes a different story. But an abstract, it's always, please write 250 words, 400 words, and and so it can just be like a dream. It can be like a total potential, essentially.
Yeah.
Like it, you can kind of, it can be very ambitious, like that one was pretty ambitious, so why not just leave it at that? I feel like there's been a lot of the preface is a Kierkegaard quote, which Marco chose, which I love. What is abstract thinking? It is thinking where there is no thinker, So why? And he wrote a book called Prefaces, where it's just a series of prefaces to books that he never wrote, and it's really beautiful. It's very funny too. So why not just leave it at the abstract? Why go further? When it was such a fun format, and they're kind of like poems. They end up being like poems,
So what is your relationship with context?
What kind of what's the what context of context?
Well, I'm thinking about all these things you're talking about, and it seems like it is without context, or the contact is the context.
Oh, right. Yeah.
It's like the session is the session.
So I was inspired by In Search. I think it's called In Search of Concrete Music, or Musique Concrète. Pierre Schaeffer. And so the idea that a sound can exist without the source and without the listener, and that it just exists by itself.
So that's exactly why I asked this question. Except it was thinking of it in a Cagean approach, because he was so. There's one particular interview where he's talking about his frustration in a way, or like his Cage type frustrations, like. The people don't understand that I'm just talking about a sound, like for a sound to not. Like for a sound to be compelling, there's that word compelling again. It doesn't have to have a context.
Right.
It doesn't have to be emotional or political. It doesn't. And then he goes into this really cute thing. He's like, I don't want sound to be in love with another sound. He's like, I just want it to be a sound.
Right.
And then he lists all the inherent qualities of a sound, like duration and amplitude and things like that. I'm totally content with that.
Yeah.
I don't want anything else.
Yeah.
So I was thinking about context, or removing context, or if you can, because you can't always remove all context.
Right. Yeah.
But maybe a lot of people wish they could.
Yeah. Well, so there's a branch of archaeology called archaeoacoustics. So it's like the study of, but they've mostly focused on the materials, the it's great. I mean, what they're doing, they're reproducing ancient musical instruments, focusing on the spaces where the sounds occurred, and and all the social and cultural context of the sound production. But I thought, well, if you're really going to be serious about studying archaeology, or sounds archaeologically, you have to say that there's the material itself, that there's that the sounds themselves have to be we have to be able to justify thinking about the sounds themselves outside of context, or outside of the moment of production or the moment of perception, that they just hover in space kind of, and I'm happy to likewise, I'm happy to allow that to happen, Well,
it makes me think of like children's art, or art that exists perhaps by an artist that is very disconnected from society,
right.
That's not inhibited, or that it is uninhibited, that is not influenced by anything or very much.
Right. Yeah.
It also feels the kind of presence, attention to the here and now that you're asking of the reader. It feels like a conscious response to something that academic spaces are not doing.
Yeah. Yeah, it's true. I mean, I'm sure you've had this experience. You go to a conference and sometimes the presentation can be so engaging that you're just pulled into the presentation. But for me, so often, I just get really curious about the room, and the people I'm around. And we're supposed to just completely ignore the space that we're in and all of the dynamics that are happening between people. And, just kind of pretend that doesn't happen. And we'll just focus, and I understand the discipline behind that. But yeah, you're right. It's like, that's what's not happening. So often that there's like an admission or an attentiveness to the here and now, Yeah.
Yeah, I also think like the title, like your two words that are especially in an art context seen as opposed, you're collapsing them together, the abstract and the concrete.
Yeah.
The way that the word abstract is used in art critical, art historical discourses is it means distancing oneself from, the tangible, the immediate. But that always feels like an incorrect formulation to me, or at least one that's not worked out.
Right.
And it seems like you're speaking to that.
Yeah, I think that's true. I think it's a resistance, maybe. It's kind of like, because I had training. Like I had my art training in abstract. I was trained by an abstract painter, and the training was resist form, resist representation, resist referring to something else.
Was that hard for you?
Yeah, it's hard. Yeah. Well, I mean, it's not. Now it's kind of the way I naturally work.
Yeah.
But don't make a smiley face, or I want to make like it's turning into they always end up being faces. But it's but the idea is like you work, you resist form, you resist representation.
My drawings often end up being landscapes.
Yeah, they're very they're beautiful though. Yeah.
But sometimes not. Sometimes
right.
I can get something that is not a form or a landscape, and it's just.
Mine always end up being machines, or machine-like, or like cars or something like that. But the idea is to for me, from my training anyway, it happened to me young, so I can't I can't get rid of it. It's just to I'm drawing a line, and that's why I do. Closing my eyes helps so much with this, It's like I'm drawing a line and I'm like, I want to make it this, and like, no, don't make it that. Make it become something you don't know what it's going to be yet, and then you keep drawing, and if I'm lucky, it ends up being. But I say resistance because in the end you have to succumb to form. Like there has to be form in the end, and there always is form, and it just.
Well, if you're creating something that's going to have an end, like
Right.
you're going to stop creating it at some point, then it has form.
Right. That's true. Yeah. Yeah. The decision to stop is one way of creating form, but
to stop drawing.
Yeah.
But even like the
well, no, never mind. Go ahead.
the common sense definition of abstract, like, oh, that's too abstract. You're being so abstract. Just be direct, and to me that's always been it's always confused me because or be straightforward. Say what you mean. You're being too abstract. I think like thought or intention is in itself it's not direct or linear or straightforward, and
Right.
so being abstract is being direct.
Yeah. Yeah, I think it's being direct, and in a lot of ways it's being more inclusive, because it's like you're gathering. As when I'm working abstractly, I'm gathering. I don't, when you're direct, I think almost by definition that's an exclusive. I mean, you're excluding. You can by through directness, and so the goal is to try to encompass as much as is relevant in this piece of writing or in this drawing as possible.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and I was also, in listening to you read the piece, like aware of, an abstract is the abstract of a scholarly article. It's a way of distilling everything into it's like an elevator pitch, distilling everything into a few words so that you're laying out what you're going to do, so that you don't have to read the article if you don't want to. You could just read the abstract. It's supposed to be one thing. It's your thesis,
Right.
And how this piece is, it's paratactical. So it's like, it's this thing, and it's this thing, and it's this thing, and it's this thing, and it doesn't resolve. And so, I was aware of how the thing that's supposed to be unifying, the single statement, it's spread into many, many different.
Oh, good. That was the goal. Wow.
You succeeded.
Yeah, that's good. Yeah. That's good. Yeah, that's kind of the goal. But
you can stop now.
Oh no way! I gotta fail then. But,
oh right.
Yeah.
Oh.
There is some kind of intentional, like intentional failure, I think, built into, drawing and writing, because you want to. It's like you want to see, again, I think that goes back into the whole idea of encompassing as much as you can, if you're, and avoiding, being too direct and too accurate, it's kind of, you're eliminating a lot of things sometimes. So,
well, especially these days, it's good to avoid accuracy.
Yeah. Why so?
Oh, I just think we have so much available to us in terms of information, and people seek accuracy. Like they might be hypothesizing about something, wondering, or in a group wondering about something, and they have this hyper access to on their phone, looking up and wanting to be accurate, wanting to prove something, and I think it gets pretty old.
Yeah,
and it degrades our ability to think dynamically.
Yeah, yeah.
This might be kind of a off-topic question, but you've taught, have you taught archaeology?
Yes.
And so in encountering a text like this, I'm just aware of your 1 foot in and 1 foot out relationship to academia. And, the fact that you're playing with this very common academic form. And I'm wondering, when you're teaching, does any of that make its way into the classroom?
Yeah, it does, because there is a branch, like a new wing of archaeology coming. I should say, there could be a new wing, a branch of art, but it's called art archaeology. So it's making its way into academia, where there's a few degree programs where you can get a degree in art/archaeology, or art and archaeology. And I as soon as I saw that, I was like, well, that's me, So I taught a class basically, where I had students read text, archaeological text, but instead of a response paper, which would be kind of the standard fashion of, respond to this paper or respond to this text, I had them make response pieces. So I had them make, a drawing or a painting or a collage, and I gave them a paper bag full of artist materials that I had collected, because I'm a collector. So I had, old maps and, tongue depressors, and everyone got a glue gun, and thumbtacks and string, clay. What else did I give them? Knives and pens and paper and things. So I gave them like a kit essentially, and had them respond to the archaeological text with a piece. It was kind of fun. Yeah.
And were they art students or archaeology students, or they're students specifically in this new field?
This was at my last school I went to, and there's no that's not part of their program. So this was kind of experimental, but most of the students were art majors, undergrad art majors, or archaeology majors, all mixed in together. So it was really fun. I mean, it was amazing discussions. Yeah.
Do you feel like, everyone hates writing papers. So when you're given the opportunity to respond to a text in, through a sculpture or an assemblage, it's like, oh, great, I don't have to write a paper. But do you feel like there were some ways in which some serious thinking, like in an archaeological sense, or like for your field, does when writing is like transmuted into sculpture or other forms, do you think it's a really truly like useful way to create knowledge in the field?
Well, something very interesting happened to me recently regarding that. But so I had a show, like an art archaeology show, through this the Nanodomain group in Serifos, Greece, where I went there. It was an artist residency called Kotoki, and I had 3 weeks, and so I noticed that the landscape was colorful. Just like the earth, there were all these colors: blues, reds, oranges, yellows, and I was like, wait a second, so that's pigment, So I just went around, gathered rocks and ground up the pigment, and made paintings. And the Kotoki, the people, Matthias and Natalia, were friends with the curator of the archaeological museum there, and he liked them, and he just told me. So I just met with him yesterday, and he's in the Greek and Roman curator section at the Met. And he told me that because of that research into kind of pigments that I did on Serifos, it prompted like a research direction in him to think about the pigmentation of these cycladic sculptures, of those beautiful cycladic figurines where the women are kind of like their arms are like this.
Oh yeah.
And we see those now, and they're polished, they're marble and stuff, right. But they were painted.
Yeah, totally, they were painted. Yeah, it's funny.
So,
it's so funny.
Yeah,
that people don't realize that.
Pink.
Right.
Yeah,
just like the dinosaurs.
Yeah,
were so colorful.
Yeah. So he said that. I mean, I don't know if it's true. Maybe he was just flattering me or something like that. But he said that because I did that. I mean, that's one example. That's just something that I did. Mm-hmm. But it definitely leads to serious knowledge production for sure. Because artists are free. They're unencumbered by lots, or most of us are. We try to be. And we experiment with materials. I think that opens up ways of thinking about the use of materials that I think a lot of archaeologists might feel more inhibited to to go in that direction, So, yeah.
Yeah, I've read a little bit about the field of artistic research, and I know there are some grad programs in Scandinavia and other parts of Europe in programs in artistic research, and there's always a question like, is this serious research, and is it being conducted by people who are knowledgeable? Because there's always that the fact that an artist is an explorer might mean that there's no serious focus in a specific field or area. So does that qualify one to be a serious researcher if you're kind of floating and, moving with where the wind blows you?
Yeah. Well, yeah, my friend Marco did his dissertation on speculation in archaeology, and his idea is that speculation, or the speculative, is so often considered a point of elimination. Once it becomes speculative, it gets dismissed. But as an archaeologist, like, we study, my feeling about archaeology is we study garbage. We literally study what gets dismissed. Like, we study trash, and I think that should include thoughts too, thoughts that are dismissed, notions, sentiments, anything that gets dismissed to me is archaeological material, So, and I think, and Marco and I feel the same way. So, yeah, about that.
Well, on that note, I think we're about out of time. And to wrap up, I wanted to ask you both what you're working on now, or is there something coming up that you want people to know about?
I'm about to release an album, two albums on a very small record label, a CDR label called Garbage Strike, owned by John Collins McCormick, who's this amazing sound artist who does a lot of performative outsider sound art that it often involves. He's a teacher, so he works with kids a lot in this type of performance, but he's also done like a lot of noise stuff like earlier in his career and collage work, and he started a record label called Garbage Strike, and it is featuring my recording with symbols and objects and a lot of forks, and then he reamped it in a silo and I think a small milk jug or something like that. And then the other recording is when he visited me, and we went to a creek and played some objects with the rushing water around us, and that's going to be on his record label Garbage Strike in March, early March. And then on March 10th, I have a show with Joanna Matry and dancer Chris, Kris, Seto, Seto, and Axine, Maxine, space capital M. And then Brian Eubanks and Alexander, I can't remember his last name. I don't know his work very well, but they're on tour. Brian Eubanks is from Germany and Alexander is from Russia. And they are playing at Suarez Brewery, which is just like a big raw room. Basically, it doesn't have brewery vibes. It's just like a big concrete space to do shows. And then April 13th is Charlotte Mundy, a vocalist, with Francisco Del Pino, and Ka Baird, an amazing extended vocalist. And then Emily Beisel, who does saxophone and electronics. And that is a venue to be determined.
I'm going to be, I finished some woodcuts for a book with the archaeologist Matt Edgeworth called Embodied Things, Bunyan's Flute and Other Poems. And Matt lives in Bedford, England. And so Matt wrote several poems dedicated to the author John Bunyan, who wrote Pilgrim's Progress. And there's several artifacts in the John Bunyan Museum. And I went there and I looked at the artifacts and I drew them, or I took pictures of them, then drew them and turned them into woodcuts. And they accompany this series of poems by Matt Edgeworth. And I'm also hopefully going to be putting together a show with friends from the International Society of Antiquaries, Greg Slick and Elisa Pritzker, that hopefully will be at the Kleinert, I think, or the Birdcliff in Woodstock. And several other potential book projects and art projects that I'm working on. So
great. Well, Evan Lindorff-Ellery and Jeff Benjamin, thanks so much for being here today.
Thank you.
Thank you.